In 1487, something happened in Tenochtitlan that no other civilization had attempted on this scale. Over the course of 4 days, lines of captives stretched from the base of the Great Temple out through the city causeways and into the surrounding lake towns. The lines did not stop. For 4 days straight, the number recorded by the Aztecs themselves was 84,000. 84,000 people in 4 days. Historians argue over the figure. Some say it was exaggerated. Some say 20,000. Some say the real number was higher. But no one disputes what those people were there for, and no one disputes what happened to every single one of them. You think you know this story? You've seen it in Apocalypto, the chase, the capture, the stone altar, the knife. A body tumbling down the steps. That's the version designed for a 2-hour film. The real version lasted months, sometimes a year, because the Aztecs didn't just kill their captives. That would have been simple, that would have been quick. And nothing about this system was built for speed. Some prisoners were fed the finest food in the empire, dressed in gold, taught to play musical instruments, given companions, given names that weren't their own. They were worshipped. People in the streets bowed to them, touched their skin, prayed to them like living gods, and then, on a specific day, calculated months in advance by priests who had been tracking the stars, every piece of that identity was removed. The gold, the name, the god they had been turned into, all of it stripped. And what was left wasn't a god. It was a man standing at the bottom of a temple with nowhere to go but up. Why build a god just to destroy him? And what happened to the prisoners who weren't chosen for that fate, but for something worse? If stories like this are why you're here, the ones most channels won't touch, subscribe to Crimson Historians. Over 100,000 people have already joined. We don't simplify history, we show it. Months from now, a man will stand on a circular stone in the center of Tenochtitlan. His ankles will be tethered, his weapon will be lined with feathers instead of obsidian. Across from him, 4 of the most decorated warriors in the empire, armed with real blades. The crowd will watch him fight a battle that was over before it started, but that is months from now. Right now, he is standing on a field outside a city he has never seen, and someone is trying to grab him. To understand what the Aztecs did to their prisoners, you have to understand how they got them, because they didn't capture people the way other empires did. There were no slave raids, no ambushes along trade routes. Instead, there were appointments. The Aztec Triple Alliance, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan would send messengers to enemy cities, not to demand surrender, to schedule a battle, a date, a location, a number of warriors from each side. These were the Xochiaoyotl, the Flower Wars, and the first thing you need to understand about them is this. They were not fought to conquer territory. They were not fought to destroy armies. They were fought to collect people, living people. A Tlaxcalan fighter walking onto a flower warfield understood that the man across from him was not trying to kill him. He was trying to grab him, pin him, drag him off the field alive. Because capturing an enemy alive was the single most important measure of status in Aztec society. Not killing, capturing. A warrior who took captives earned the right to specific garments, access to military councils, eligibility for the highest warrior orders in the empire. The entire military hierarchy was built on a single metric. How many living people have you personally seized? This created something historians have struggled to categorize, a military system where death on the battlefield was a failure. Not a moral failure, a logistical one. A dead enemy couldn't be marched back to Tenochtitlan, couldn't be painted, couldn't be presented at the temple, couldn't feed what needed to be fed. So the macuahuitl, the obsidian-edged club, wasn't swung to kill on these fields. It was swung to break a leg or open a shoulder just enough to bring a man down without finishing him. Then drag him off the field, bind him, and begin the walk back to the capital. That walk could take days, sometimes weeks. The captive was guarded, but not starved, not beaten, because what waited for him in Tenochtitlan required him to be intact. The first thing a captive saw when he entered Tenochtitlan was the temple. It was visible from every approach, across the causeways, from the lake, from every street that led into the ceremonial centre. 45 meters high, the stairs dark with old blood. He knew what happened at the top. Everyone knew. What he did not know yet was whether he was going to the top or somewhere else entirely. Not all captives were equal, and the Aztecs had a system for determining who went where. The first factor was the warrior who captured them. His rank, his record, his standing within his order, these determined the initial value of the captive. The second factor was the captive himself, his size, his bearing, his visible fitness, whether he had fought well on the field or collapsed quickly, whether he showed signs of fear during the march or kept his composure. All of this was observed, recorded, assessed, because different rituals required different kinds of people. Some ceremonies needed large groups, dozens, hundreds. These captives were processed quickly. Their fate came within days, sometimes hours of arrival. They climbed the steps of the Templo Mayor, and what happened at the top followed the pattern everyone already knows. The obsidian knife, the chest opened, the heart removed while still beating. The body rolled down the steps. The next captive stepped forward. This was the version that happened at scale, the version that produced those 4-day numbers in 1487. But it wasn't the only version, because some captives were pulled aside, not for the mass ceremonies, for something that took longer. These individuals were selected based on criteria the priests controlled. Physical appearance mattered, symmetry, skin condition, age, a specific kind of composure that the sources describe but never fully define. Something about the way the captive carried himself that made him suitable for a different role. These men were not sent to the temple steps. They were sent to the Kalmakak, the priestly schools. And what happened to them there had no equivalent anywhere else in the ancient world. The selected captive was cleaned. His war paint was removed. His hair was washed and recut. His body was scrubbed with specific preparations the sources attribute to the priests. Then he was dressed, not in prisoner garments, not in rags, in the ceremonial clothing of a god. Each major deity in the Aztec pantheon had a specific visual identity. Tezcatlipoca wore obsidian mirrors and a distinctive face paint pattern. Tepetotec was associated with flayed skin garments. Huitzilopochtli was marked with hummingbird feathers and a specific shade of blue. The selected captive was made to look exactly like the deity he had been assigned to. He became what the Aztecs called an ixiptla, a living image, not a representative, not an actor, not a stand-in performing a role. In the Aztec theological framework, the ixiptla was the god, not symbolically, literally. The moment the clothing went on, the identity changed. The captive's name was replaced with the god's name. People who spoke to him used the god's titles. When he walked through the streets, people didn't treat him as a prisoner dressed in costume. They treated him as divine. They knelt, they brought offerings, they asked for blessings. Children were brought to him, and this went on for months. The most documented version of this process involved the ixiptla of Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, one of the most significant deities in the Aztec system. This captive lived as Tezcatlipoca for close to a year. During that year, he was taught to play the flute. Specifically, he was trained to play it well. He was given 4 female companions, themselves selected for the role, who were presented as goddess figures and stayed with him throughout the final weeks. He walked freely through the city. He ate the same food as nobility. He was given flowers, incense, and gold ornaments that he wore in public. From the outside, this looked like the most privileged existence a captive could receive. But here's what was happening underneath all of it. The priests monitored him constantly. Not for escape, there was nowhere to go. Tenochtitlan was an island city connected by causeways, and every causeway was controlled. They monitored him for something else. his demeanor, his willingness, whether the transformation was working. Because the entire ritual required one specific outcome that no amount of force could guarantee. When the day came, the captive had to walk to his death willingly, not dragged, not bound, not forced up the steps by guards. He had to climb them himself. He had to break the flutes he had played for months, one on each step as he ascended. He had to arrive at the top composed, and he had to lie down on the stone voluntarily. This is the part that historians have spent decades trying to explain. Some argue it was psychological conditioning, that months of worship rewired the captive's identity until he genuinely believed he was the god, that by the time the day arrived, he didn't see himself as a prisoner anymore. Others point out that resistance was functionally impossible. Surrounded by thousands, on an island with no weapon and no ally, what would fighting accomplish? The outcome was fixed. The only variable was dignity. A third interpretation, and the one the sources seem to support most directly, is that the Aztecs understood something about identity that modern psychology would later formalize. If you treat a person as something long enough in a consistent enough environment with enough social reinforcement, they begin to act as that thing. Not because they believe it, but because the boundary between performance and identity erodes. The Xiptla didn't need to believe he was a god. He just needed to stop believing he was still a prisoner. And months of gold, music, worship, and physical comfort could do that. But there was one thing they could never fully erase. The captive always knew the date. The festival calendar was public. Everyone in Tenochtitlan knew when Tezcatlipoca's ceremony fell. The captive, living inside the god's identity, knew it too. Every day of comfort came with a countdown attached, and the sources record something the priests watched for carefully. In the final weeks, some Xiptla grew quiet, stopped playing the flute, stopped engaging with the companions. They didn't resist, they didn't attempt escape, they simply withdrew. The priests had a term for this. The sources translate it roughly as the god grows heavy. When it happened, the ritual continued anyway. This is the kind of history most people never hear. If you think these stories deserve to be told properly, share this video with someone who needs to see it. And if you haven't already, subscribe. We're just getting started. Not every captive was made into a god. Some were given something that looked, from the outside, like a chance. The festival of Tlacaxipehualistli, the flaying of men, was one of the most attended events in the Aztec ceremonial calendar. It honored Tzipetotec, the god associated with agricultural renewal, spring, and the shedding of old skin. The central ritual of Tlacaxipehualistli involved the Temalacatl, a circular stone, massive, carved, positioned in a public space where hundreds, sometimes thousands, could watch. The